Wow, it is great to see that everybody survived the monsoon to get here. What a night for a soiree. I guess, you know, it's nice that we are in air conditioning tonight. There's been some years that we've done the soiree outdoors, and this would not have been a pleasant experience. And so we are especially grateful to Morven tonight. And speaking of Morven, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Rhonda Damascus, the Executive Director, to welcome everybody. But I also want to mention that we have Jennifer Podolsky here, the Executive Director of the Princeton Public Library. And also, just that this is an event that our whole entire staff works together on, so I want to thank our IT team for being here for filming. I want to thank our public humanities specialist for stepping into his alter ego as sorbet scooper, you know, PhD public humanities specialist by day and sorbet scooper by night. And Kim for handling all the registrations, and Ellen for helping out, and also, of course, Greer from Morven for helping collaborate and all this. And so, Rhonda, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you.
This is my second year for the Summer Soirée. I am the Executive Director, Rhonda Damascus. I've been here a year and a few months. I'm so grateful to the Princeton Library for this partnership. This is such a wonderful event, and as you probably noticed coming in, we're actually doing yoga outside in the rain as well. So we are everything to everybody right now. But just want to remind you, I'm not sure if anybody, if this is your first time here, just kind of a show of hands, is this your first time at Morven? Oh my goodness. So you guys have all, okay. All right, so you've all been here before. I want to remind everybody too to check out our website and to visit our museum. You know, we are the home of Richard Stockton, the signer of the Declaration of Independence. We were the governor's mansion, and it's through our exhibitions and our educational programs and special events that we highlight New Jersey's history and culture. Check out our website. We have a banner out in the atrium. We have an upcoming garden tour. We're partnering with the Historical Society of Princeton. There's a number of private tours we're going to be touring in September, so you can get a chance to kind of get a peek. And it is a fundraiser for Morven and for the Historical Society of Princeton. It's the first time we're doing it, and you can sign up out there if you're interested. I encourage you to come back and, of course, join us for the big party in 2026. It's the 250th. It's the semi-quincentennial. The signing it's the 250th. So all of that, the whole semi-quincentennial should be rolling off all of our tongues. I hope you can join us for all of the festivities there. And just a shout out to my staff too, that was really hard to pull this together, as well as the library. We're so glad you could be here tonight. This is such a lovely crowd. It's so nice to see all of you, so you're not all down the shore. It's nice to know there's in Princeton. So I look forward to talking to you this evening. I look forward to the program, and thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you, Rhonda, for the lovely welcome, and again for hosting the soiree tonight on the grounds of Morven for the second year in a row. The library always loves working with you as well, and so this is the perfect location, as we said, for tonight. The soiree has actually been an annual event since 2016. It's moved around town to various locations, and it's a highlight of the summer, both for library staff and for our community of readers. It's a part of our summer reading program. Tonight's event features Claire Messud discussing this Strange Eventful History, a novel filled with adventure that moves across time with settings on different continents, and it's a work of historical fiction. So it's even more meaningful that we are having this soiree here at one of Princeton's own historic sites. This event, as I said, is part of summer reading. If you have yet to sign up, just talk to one of our staff members to find out how you can take part. As well, when you came in, you should have received a red ticket for the book raffle at the end. If you didn't, please go out and talk to Kim. She'll make sure that you're in the raffle for the end of the evening. And if you picked up one of the pens, Kim says to tell you that there's a little thingy on the end of the pen that you should take off. Okay, those are the messages from Kim. I also want to take a moment, of course, to thank Labyrinth Books, our stalwart partners at all book events, and for being our bookseller again tonight. Claire will be signing copies of her book in the atrium at the conclusion of the formal part of the program, as will Amy Jo Burns, our moderator. So with all that being said, let's introduce our author and moderator for the evening. Claire Messud is an American-Canadian-French / novelist and professor of creative writing and literature. Her official biography on her website is short and to the point, simply stating that she is the author of 6 works of fiction, a recipient of Guggenheim and Radcliffe Fellowships and the Strauss Living Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and that she teaches at Harvard University and lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But for tonight's event, I felt important to round this out just a bit and say a bit more about Claire and her works. Her novels often explore themes of family, identity, and the complexities of human relationships, frequently drawing from her own family history and international upbringing. She is known for creating complex and often really quite unconventional female characters, and she likes to explore the inner lives and motivations of those characters. Her works include The Emperor's Children, The Woman Upstairs, and The Burning Girl, and her latest novel, which we're here to celebrate tonight, The Strange Eventful History, is inspired by her family's own experiences as French Algerians displaced after Algerian independence. Here's a fun piece of trivia. She was considered for the 2003 Granta Best of Young British Novelist list, although none of the 3 passports she holds is British. I don't know how that one worked out. So she is going to be in discussion tonight with Amy Jo Burns, who is the author of the memoir Cinderland and the novel Shiner, which was a Barnes & Noble Discover pick and an NPR Best Book of the Year. Her latest novel, Mercury, is a Barnes & Noble Book Club pick, a Book of the Month pick, People Magazine Book of the Week, and an Editor's Choice selection in the New York Times. Her next novel, and I've already got her on the calendar, by the way, which is called Wait For Me, and it's going to be released in March of 2026. So know that we will be having Amy Jo at the library then. So with this, we're going to have Claire come to the podium and give a little bit of reading before they progress to the discussion portion of the evening. All my notes, and then I forgot. So the whole reason that Claire's here tonight is because she's really good friends with another local person. Her name is Diana Weimar. Diana Weimar is a great friend of the library and a great friend of mine. And Diana and I were discussing about, well, who should we have for the soiree? And she said, I think Claire would be perfect. She's a good friend. And I'm like, oh. So, anyways, so Diana, would you please come and tell us about this? I'm sorry, Diana. I think the humidity got to my brain.
I haven't even started talking and I've run out of time. So this is my delightful, somewhat uneventful history with Claire. In 2017, the New York Times published an article called Who's Afraid of Claire Messud? I knew the answer to that question without reading the article. I was. I was afraid of Claire because I had read her book, The Woman Upstairs, and it blew my mind. There are books that you pick up and there are books that pick you up. Claire's books pick you up, and they do not leave you where you were when you started them. And for days after you have finished them, they do not let you go. I was afraid of Claire because she is such a fierce, intuitive writer, so emotionally intelligent, and I feared that if I ever met her, she would be able to read my deepest, darkest thoughts. For example, she wrote this line, "There's so much of life to get through after you realize that none of your dreams will come true." On February 10th, 2020, I went to an event, just to repeat that again, February 10th, 2020. I know maybe we're forgetting, I don't know if we are. I went to an event to benefit the Authors Guild Foundation. Come, a friend who knew her said, "You'll love Claire." I had my doubts. Admire, of course. Love, I wasn't sure. And then she stood up to speak. She read an essay about aging, smelly, beloved dogs, her dogs. And then, like a character in one of her novels, I felt things. I felt drawn into her web. I felt a kinship. She felt like someone I would like to walk dogs with. In February 2020, fearing that we would need words to bring comfort, I messaged Claire on Instagram to ask her for a quote to stitch and post. The quote she shared with me was one of her favorites from Julian of Norwich. "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." And then she added one of hers from her article, "The time for art is now," from the Paris Review. Art has the power to alter our interior selves, and in so doing, to inspire, exhilarate, provoke, connect, and rouse us. As we are changed, our souls awakened to the possibility, immeasurable, yes, but potentially infinite. If there was ever a time for art, it's now. I stitched and posted both of those quotes. In 2023, the photographer Winky Lewis, Roz Chast, Claire, and I had a show together in Portland, Maine. It was called Life's Odd Ephemera. I got to watch the writer become another kind of artist, to watch Claire recreate her mother's desk with objects, postcards, notes, photographs, and letters from her family. How well she knew those objects, but also how well she knew what they would mean to others, what they meant to me. Her late father's filofax, our late fathers recognized in the same exhibit. This important fabric made out of the loss of a person and the presence of an object. When I read This Strange Eventful History in 2024, the book that Amy Jo is here tonight to discuss with Claire, I could not believe that she, my friend, had created such a masterpiece, that she could honor her family history, and really all family histories, in such a way that she could capture us in the web in which she had existed her entire life. That she could make me wish more than I already did that my father was alive again, because she made the worlds from which we come worthy of telling stories about again and again, until they are forever written into the fabric of our beings. In This Strange Eventful History, she writes, I'm a writer, I tell stories. Of course, really, I want to save lives, or simply, I want to save life. During the pandemic, Claire took photos for months of her garden shed from her desk. She sat writing and observing as the world slowly spun around her so that we could see the beauty, the loneliness, the meaning that she saw. And this makes me less afraid for all of us.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Amy Jo. Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Diana. I'm a little, there's that French word, ému. I'm a little short, I'm a little speechless. I got a little verklempt. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. There are some dear familiar faces, and many of you I'm seeing for the first time. It's wonderful to be here with you. Thank you so much for coming. And I thought I would. I had in mind one bit I was going to read. I said I'll definitely read this bit, and then I was thinking maybe I should read another bit. And then I thought, can I ask the audience which bit I should read? And I thought, no, I should just choose. I think. But to say just a word about this novel. It's called This Strange Eventful History, which I know is a title that proves hard to remember because the number of people who said the uneventful, it is a little something anyway. So, but it comes from the speech in As You Like It, from the end of the All the World's a Stage speech, and towards the end of that, if you all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, we have our exits and our entrances, and each man in his time plays seven. Many parts, their acts being 7 stages, ages, whatever, and then it goes through life, and then at the end, the last act that ends this strange eventful history is, so that's what the title comes from, and indeed the book has 7 parts, 7 sections, and it goes from 1940 to 2010, and it's about the life, 3 generations in the life of this family, the Cassars family, who are French colonials in Algeria, and then by 1962, well, earlier in fact, French colonials outside Algeria, sort of cast around the world. There are lots of different places. There are 5 different points of view. Only one first person, which is the 3rd generation, Chloe, who as a child wants to be a writer and grows up to be a writer, and would correspond more or less with my own age. And she speaks in the prologue, and it doesn't appear again until sort of halfway through the book. And I suppose so I had thought before I came, I thought, I will read a section that is about François. So there are three generations. There's Gaston and Lucienne, who were born essentially with the 20th century. And then there is François and his sister Denise, and he marries a woman named Barbara, and they're born in the 1930s, and then the youngest generation born in the 60s. I thought, I still can't, historical novel, and I'm like, is 1989 historical? It's just like a minute ago. But I thought, it's just a minute ago, really. So I thought I would read a 1989, and then Jane, when you said it's a historical novel, I thought, should I read a 1950s bit about in Algeria? But you know what? I'm just going to go with Greenwich, Connecticut, because I feel as though, if nothing else, there'll be a. It's a little distance from here, but in some ways not so far. And this is a François section, and I hope it won't take too long. As he sat in his cracked black leather armchair in his basement study, reading, François could not stop thinking about it, all the reasons for it. Poor dear Larry's poor son David, dead on Lake Michigan last summer, and Larry and Babs desperate with the loss. Or the collapse of his office around him, or the probably still seeping radiation from Chernobyl even a few years later. Or his own entrapment. Wasn't he allowed to lament it? His own entrapment in this house, in this marriage, in this life? Who else would? Barbara was at the library's book design committee meeting, in the company of that pallid, bony wasp she was so taken with, a minor heiress of some sort who reminded him of the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, and the obese Bryn Mawr alumna whose tent-like dresses somehow contrived barely to touch her vast body, and she would then go shop for supper at the food emporium. Not fish, please, he requested, before coming home, leaving him alone for hours on this squalid Saturday afternoon. Alone, except for Waffles, the one-eared, stump-tailed, ball-obsessed Jack Russell, for whom, after they'd had lunch, for François, the ham and cheese sandwich with mayo that she left on a plate on the counter covered in foil, and for Waffles, 7 small cubes of Gruyere for which he'd had to sit and stay and lie down and twirl and then back through the routine to sit, all the while roundly insulted by his master. François had thrown the tennis ball several times down the corridor, though not to Waffles' dismay, with Barb's zeal. After less than 10 minutes, François had retreated to his basement lair, his reading lamp alight at 2 in the afternoon, the silence punctuated momentarily by Waffles' tapping paws on the wooden floor overhead, and then, after the dog curled up to sleep in a crescent on the living room sofa, only by the sound of the water trickling in the downspout by the window and the wavering percussion of raindrops on the flagstones outside. Early March. The rain, melting the snow, had shrunk the drifts into isolated, dingy hummocks fringed with soot. It had revealed the sodden, dead scruff of grass beneath, tussocks floating in black ice water, all the branches still bare. At one point, Laddie, the neighbor's bulky Labrador, trotted gracefully across the yard past the window, a bright, wet blob in the murk, mercifully unseen upstairs by Waffles, who detested him. François pretended to read the Mukaddima, to reread, that is, after 30 years, because some time back Chloe had brought her copy home from college and left it there, and Barb, recently clearing out clutter from various corners, had been preparing to take it to the book exchange at the Greenwich dump, prompting in François a wave of protective nostalgia for Ibn Khaldun, 14th century North African luminary and companion of his scholarly youth. He had sequestered the fat, glossy yellow paperback in his study. What for, if not to read it? So he read it. Had it always been so turgid? What relevance could he possibly find in these thin, dense pages? And his mind, his body too, eventually strayed to the kitchen upstairs, where he placed his tumbler upon the counter. Corian, mind you, the latest thing. Barb had very much wanted it when they renovated the kitchen, and had chosen pale blue, her favorite color. His tumbler, the kids mocked what they called his OCD, but surely in this house for which he had earned every penny, for which, When he thought about it, he had sacrificed his life, because how long had it been since he'd enjoyed a single day, and yet in which he was consigned like a monster or freak, like the Minotaur, to one room in the basement. Might he not at the very least claim his one drinking glass as his very own and insist that no one else touch it? He had drunk water in it at breakfast time and water in it at lunchtime, and now at 2, at 3, 3:30, the clock progressing with such impossible lassitude, the water outside dripping, the day ever darkening, all he could think of and all that he wanted was a drink. Just one, not scotch, which he preferred after dinner, not gin, his favorite but also his shame, just a little untraceable snifter of vodka. He'd rinse the glass, retreat downstairs, a cigarette or two in the course of an hour, a little mint, a sharp green pastivalda, the embossed tin brought in his luggage from Paris, and who would be any the wiser? Waffles wasn't telling. What would it matter? Just one. But he promised himself none before the cocktail hour. Correction. He'd made himself that promise after he'd failed to keep his earlier promise not to drink except modestly when in restaurants or at work functions, which was after his failed promise of January not to drink at all, which had lasted all of 7 days. Though the lapse had hardly been his fault, the magnitude of the disaster was immediately clear. No, it had proven more disastrous still than he'd imagined then, the consequences only now beginning to unfold. How could he not be forgiven for requiring some small help to get through it all? He climbed the stairs. He heard the dog stir and patter, tags jangling into the kitchen, where François insulted him and paused to take the absolute from the freezer. It grew viscous in the cold, and to unscrew its metal top and to pour an inch, no, if just one drink, then maybe two, into his special glass, which stood alone on the meticulously clean countertop the way he felt he stood alone in his life. And then he carefully screwed the top back on and opened the freezer and laid the bottle gently on its side, next to the frozen peas and the tater tots. When they were younger, even when the girls were at home, Barb would never have sunk to tater tots. She prepared everything herself all those years from scratch, but this bag in the freezer was a concession to midlife, a minor freedom, and in truth, they both quite liked them. Waffles, throughout, waited patiently, eyes on his master, body quivering with intensity. When François looked at him, he sat without being asked, so hopeful. Stop trembling, you little creep. François' insults were affectionate. He shook a few peanuts from the jar in the drinks cabinet and threw them one at a time in high arcs for Waffles to leap for and catch in midair. When Waffles failed to intercept the peanut before it hit the ground, François called him pathetic and stupid, but affectionately. In between throwing the peanuts, he took significant medicinal sips of his vodka as though it were cod liver oil, and each time closed his eyes and winced as the cold, bitter fluid slipped down his gullet. He gauged perfectly the consumption of peanuts and vodka so that both he and Waffles finished their treats at the same time. He washed his glass at the sink in hot water with dish soap. Rather than leave it in the drain board, he dried it with a dish towel and returned it to its place on the counter. Waffles continued to shiver expectantly. Finished, François said sternly, wiping his hands together in a gesture meaningful to the dog. Finished. Waffles, sorrowful, turned and slunk back to the couch. Getting on for 4:30. She'd be back within the hour. He both longed for and dreaded her return. Over Christmas, when he'd been railing about something, one of them, was it Chloe, had asked, "What's wrong? What is it you want?" And the words had burst from him without hesitation. He remembered grabbing both sides of his head as though his skull might explode. "I want to be left alone." But this was only half true. He wanted to be seen, accepted if not understood. He wanted the companionship his parents felt. He always had, and had never felt it. So he wanted not to feel alone. But how was this possible when his family seemed always to reject him? He wanted so desperately it lived as an itch beneath his skin, the very itch that drove him to unscrew time and again the metal tops of his various toxic bottles. He wanted to be relieved of the pointless, grueling busy work that consumed his days, had consumed them for decades, and had stolen his best years. So many airplane flights, so many hotel rooms, so many meetings, so many tours of plants and factories, so many phone calls, so many fat printed reports with final covers, their contents exponentially more turgid than the Mukaddimah. So many backstabbers, manipulators, liars, dirty cheats, so much grubbing for attention, position, promotion, connection, like ants soaring their hill, climbing over one another, heedless, insatiably but meaninglessly driven. Camus, his soulmate, had it right, crushing his own ability to think and to learn, to follow his interests and exercise his mind. It had once been a good mind, a fine mind even, Had Sir Hamilton Gibb not written on his paper in that pristine hand he recalled so well that François was the finest analysis of contemporary Turkey that he had yet encountered? But so what? He had lost that interior space, that intellectual gift, like a sports car rusted irreparably over years in a garage or a prisoner kept in the dark in a tiny cell. And how could he even know now what it would be he might want, without having had, for longer than he could remember, an iota of mental space in which to pose the question? And what had this sacrifice given him in return but money enough, though never quite enough, and the recurring resentment of his wife and daughters, who seemed to find him unseemly and repellent, who never stopped to ask themselves how they came to enjoy their fine educations or their pleasant home, who seemed rather always to find fault? When they first moved in, Barb had stationery printed that called this place Tiki Tacky House. She'd spelled it that way, K-K-I, instead of Tiki Tacky, because she thought this faux Polynesian flavor more amusing, in any case a reference to the Pete Seeger song of their youth. And they're all made out of Tiki Tacky, and they all look just the same. Because she was ashamed to be in a townhouse, in a cul-de-sac, in a condo development in Greenwich, Connecticut, when all her friends in Toronto lived in sprawling Victorian houses in Forest Hill and Rosedale, and by such measures only in her world were a person's triumphs known. That she had seen the sun rise over the Mayan temples in the Yucatan, that she had had her photo taken in sun hat and bathing suit by a giant cactus on a rocky outcrop in the Galapagos, surrounded by 1,000 lazy-eyed yellow iguanas, that she could read any book she chose and procure any food, that she owned a closet full of clothes she barely wore. None of it, it seemed, was enough. That she did not even begin to understand what it had cost him, what it cost him now, that she did not seem even to care. He consulted his watch. Not time for another glass, not if he wanted to be sure she didn't find out. He very much didn't want her to know. He didn't think Chloe had told her about Christmas, though who could be sure? Barb hadn't referred to it, and she wasn't good at hiding her feelings. Then again, maybe she was trying to be more sympathetic, kinder to him, because of the scandal at work.
Thank you so much for reading such a beautiful passage for us. And I want to thank you guys all for coming out. I was telling Claire, this is the most incredible reading community, and I'm so happy that we got to invite Claire to come and spend this evening with us. I have to tell you, I went to grad school from 2009 to 2011 at Hunter College in New York City, and Claire taught a class there that was a survey of American literature. And let me tell you, everybody wanted to take this class. And I wasn't able to take the class, so what is so great is that not only is 2025 me so excited, 2009 me is freaking out. And it's a really rare and special thing to have someone who is an incredible writer but also an incredible educator. So thank you so much for coming to Princeton. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Amy Jo. Thank you for doing this conversation.
Of course. I think a great place for us to start is, we all sort of know that this novel in particular is inspired a little bit by some family history, but can you tell us, where did this book begin for you?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's a good, it seems like a simple question, but
it's not.
But it's not. I mean, you know, so I just a little background about the French in Algeria. I don't know how familiar people are with that history, which seems very far from, you know, here and now. But the French colonized Algeria in 1830, and it was a French colony until 1962. The French had not as many colonies as the British, but they had a lot of them. But Algeria was uncommon in being like, as indeed the Caribbean islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique are now, in being a department of France. So there were French colonials in Morocco, there were French colonials in Lebanon, there were in Senegal and so on. But Algeria was treated politically as a department of France. So just to because we could get into the whole, like, all of the French history. Charles de Gaulle said as late as I think it was even possibly 1960, he said, France is France from Brest to Tamanrasset. Tamanrasset being the southernmost point of Algeria in the desert. So, and that was when the War of Independence had been underway since 1954. So it was a very brutal war. It's a war that, this is not answering the question. It's actually something that prefigures a lot of where we are in the world today, has its origins in that time. So the French notoriously tortured Algerian citizens and freedom fighters in a sort of, so Abu Ghraib is sort of, and black sites and all of that history that we have as an American history has an origin there. The civilian bombings by freedom fighters it's almost the first time. I think there's one other instance in the 1920s, maybe in Ireland, and I suppose there's always the one that makes Joseph Conrad's the secret agent, but that was whatever, a whole other thing. But the idea that the terrorists would be ordinary citizens, indistinguishable from regular people, and that they would be planting bombs to kill civilians, that is something that started there. So, and then as it turned out, also things like drilling for oil. So a lot of, Algeria has a huge oil reserves, and in the 50s they were looking for those. Anyway, you asked, why my family? So my family, my father's family, and that's another thing about Algeria, people from all over. So my ancestors, French, Spanish, Italian, and Maltese, right? So all of those people emigrated to Algeria to make new lives there, intermarried, were categorized as French and white as opposed to native Algerians. Another story we could tell, like there had been a Jewish community there for thousands of years, and that Jewish community was given French citizenship in the wake of the Dreyfus affair. And what that meant is that when Algeria had its independence, all of those people had to leave, right? Because they were associated with the French. So anyway, so that history was never talked about at my house. You would think it didn't happen to anybody I knew. My father never mentioned it. So his father was in the Navy. He as a child was in Beirut before the war and Salonic at the beginning of the war. That we were told stories about that. We were never told about his Algerian past. And so it wasn't until I was an adult that I really came to understand. And if there are any French people or people associated with French people in this audience, you'll know that it's still an open wound in France. And still people, don't want to have that topic come up at a dinner table because it's so, people have such strong emotions and feelings. So one of the things I realized only later is that my dad wanted above all for us not to have that experience. He wanted to liberate us from that experience. He wanted us to be cheerful North American kids who didn't think about stuff like that and didn't really know it. And he succeeded. And then in some perverse, weird way, you get to a certain age and you start sort of scrabbling around, digging. And I was helped in that by the fact that my grandfather, in his retirement, spent several years writing a family history that covers 1928, when my grandparents married, till the end of the Second World War, till 1946. And that only little bits of that are in the book, because the book starts in 1940 and goes to 2010. But so the beginning of the novel was maybe for me when I started 25 years ago, 30 years ago, asking questions. And I wrote another novel called The Last Life, which has stuff about the Algerian War in it, but it doesn't have any family stuff. And then so that you could say began there. And then finally, I've been doing research. When I was at Hunter, some students helped me with research. But I read my grandfather's memoir. I had a leave from teaching in 2017, and I read the whole thing. And then it was after that the novels started teaching. Sorry, that was all.
But I love that though, because there really is never one answer to where a novel begins, and it's just this organic thing that is part life, part imagination, and that's what makes it so incredibly special. And after I read your acknowledgments where you had mentioned that you'd read your grandfather's memoir, I remembered my grandfather also wrote a memoir, and I had a PDF of it in my email, and so I took a look at it, and he wrote mostly about what his time in World War II was like. And there's something interesting about the physicality of, my grandfather has this very striking handwriting, and then it's photocopied and it's crooked, and there's like the story, but then there's also the story that you just see visually on the page. And what was that process like reading your grandfather's memoir?
Yeah, the process of working on this book, we've talked about it was bringing back to life for me people who aren't here. And to read my grandfather's memoir was to hear his voice. It's in French and it's handwritten. He had very tidy handwriting. He wrote in very straight lines. He was a meticulous fellow. He'd been in the Navy. I think that Navy people are meticulous. He was super meticulous, and yet because it included letters, and so I was hearing his voice from before I was born. I was reading letters that my father wrote as a child to his father. It was that I can wax rhapsodic about the power of the written word, right? So there's the physical thing, like it was written by my grandfather and there are photographs taped in and so on. But it's also just the rhythm of the sentences and the choices of the words, and that he wrote it for my sister and me, and we were children, and at one point he says, "You probably won't read this for 30 years, and I thought it was actually a little longer. But I did read it, but him imagining us, and I feel that so powerfully about letters. Go back home and write letters to everybody in your family, but it's such because that's another thing that I was reading as I was working on the book is my dad came to study in the States as a Fulbright scholar in the early 50s, and I don't have the letters he sent home, but I have all the letters that his family sent to him. And when I was opening them up to read them, they were aerograms and the airmail, the paper, the light blue, very thin paper, and I could picture him coming out of the post office thing, like tearing them open and then pulling the thing out and reading it super fast and then stuffing it back in and thinking nobody's taken this sheet of paper out of the envelope since 1953, and here it is for me, and I know what they were doing. Like, they wrote to him several times a week. I know what they were doing every day for months, and what they thought about and dreamed about and worried about, and I feel that this is just my little letter writing thing. I feel like we have lost that intimacy. It was a gesture of respect to somebody to care enough to write down our thoughts and share it, not with 1,000 people with likes, but just with one person. Or a family, right? And it valorized our small lives, and I feel like we've lost a sense of that, and I'm a big believer in trying to retrieve that sense. That's my little digression. My letter writing book.
And this book is so quotable. Even just from the section that you read, there's so many beautiful sentences, and so I just wanted to talk about a couple of my favorites. But this is a book about, pieds-noirs, which you mentioned, are, people who are French that lived in Algeria, and you have this beautiful, it's not even a full sentence, it's a phrase. It says, the pieds-noirs used to say, the suitcase or the coffin. That was it. And this family, the Cassars, they lead such an itinerant lifestyle, and yet they each have this deep longing for something in their own specific ways. And I'm just wondering, what do you think, this is a book about legacy, I think, too, and even just hearing you talk about this legacy that your grandfather even imagined for you in this memoir you wrote, what do you think the legacy of this family is?
Of the fictional family?
Yes.
The legacy of so legacy for whom? I don't know what the legacy of the fictional thing. I know what the legacy of my family is. Like, I felt I had to read the book. I think It's such a good question. I feel as though my mind is going different ways and I have different sorts of answers, but I think one that comes to mind is I don't know how, if some of you might be familiar, there's a wonderful, now old essay by Salman Rushdie called Imaginary Homelands that was published, I think, in the late 1980s or early 1990s. And he writes about the fact that as soon as you've left home because of time, home is changing and you are changing, and the home that you left only exists in your imagination. And when you go back to that home, and I mean, you can leave from one country to another, or you can leave from, you know, Chicago to LA, you know, that doesn't, but that we're living the whole time with a sort of imaginary past that we're carrying with us, and I think I'm so aware that the state of the 20th and 21st centuries, and then one realizes, of course, actually time immemorial, is people traveling, is people being uprooted and displaced, sometimes by choice, right? Taking a job in a different country or going to study in a different country, and sometimes involuntarily. And you know, we live in a time of great upheaval, and there are many refugees within our country and many refugees around the world, and that's a way of living in the world that's different from being settled, right? To have a sort of bifurcated life. So I feel like, in terms of the legacy, I mean, I feel as though there's a whole chunk of people in the world who live that way,
Yes.
who live between cultures, between histories and present, and then there are other people who live in one world, right? And which seems a wonderful ideal. But I suppose that is just some record of that, I would say.
Absolutely. The beautiful thing about this book is that all of it is kind of in media res, and and you capture these moments so beautifully. And you know, this is sort of along the same lines, but my favorite quote in the book comes near the beginning, but it says, "Each of us, sooner or later, has to confront what makes a life worth living." And I think that's one of the big questions that the book asks. And I'm curious, did you find an answer as you were writing to that idea? You know, what is it that makes life worth living? That's a huge question.
That's a big question.
Yeah.
You don't.
Oh, well, you know what? This is what I think, though. I think what writers do is they think it is, and we believe it is our responsibility to ask these questions that we do not have answers to. And it takes you on a really wonderful journey. And sometimes at the end you don't have an answer, but there's something that moves you about the journey. And that's what I felt when I was reading this, that there is something that sort of moves you about, like I said, being in media res. And I was just curious if there is something that you felt when you were writing this, that, okay, this is it, this is what it means, you know, to have family, or what it means. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about family secrets too as well, but was there something that just pressed upon you as you were writing in terms, yeah?
I mean, I guess I it's sort of like the letter thing, or I kind of believe that we're all told a lot of lies about what makes life worth living, and that actually what makes life worth living is in the smallest moments, in the most seemingly insignificant, you know. And it made me sound like Pollyanna. I sound like Pollyanna, but I mean, you know, but I thought, stop and smell the roses. But there is some way, you know, in which, with Diana talking about objects, I feel like what having something that a family member treasured or used every day, and just having it with you, it can be incredibly emotionally powerful and satisfying and meaningful to you know. I think that what makes life, I mean, I guess I'm somebody, and you are too, you know, when you give your life to writing, you're feeling that actually makes life worth living, even if maybe nobody reads it, right?
Yes.
I mean, but that's the thing about the the letter in the envelope is somebody wrote the letter and somebody read it, and then for 70 years nobody read it, and then I read it, and it was still there. And I think, I think that about the traces of our existence over time, and forgive me, again, it's a thing, but that I can, if any of you have read Tolstoy's early writings, childhood, boyhood, youth, is that the order of them? And you read them, and it's like a pane of glass. You're suddenly, they're autobiographical, but you're suddenly on an estate in rural Russia in 1830, and you hear and smell and see everything, and you feel what this little boy felt, and centuries and continents collapse. And that, to me, I like the human experience in all its immense complexity. That makes life worth living, to experience, but also to learn about it, and to feel as though, think how many of the stories are not yet told, But I know, I'm Pollyanna, I know.
It's not Pollyanna though, because I think, even in what you read, there was such a longing in Francois' voice, but there's also this beauty of that everyday thing. It's the tater tots, it's the glass he's holding, it's, fighting with the cat, that I think is, dog. Sorry. That I think is so moving, because it's not just about, these people are wanderers, but they're seekers too, and that's why I think we follow them throughout this book, and we hold our breath. And then, I mentioned there is a family secret that's at play in this book, and it's sort of very briefly mentioned in the middle, and then at the very end of the book, it makes you want to reread it, think, oh my gosh, And it's so brilliantly executed, and I would just love to know, how did that secret shape the writing of it? I mean, did you start knowing there was this family secret, or did that come about as you were crafting it?
I know. I knew that there'd be this family secret. I think one of the things I was saying earlier to someone here that I'm always saying to students, the order of the dissemination of information in a narrative is as significant as the information itself. The big decisions that we're making are not just what to put in, what to leave out, what order to put the information in. And it would be a different book if that, it would be a very different book if that information were there at the beginning. But one of the things that I have a digression problem. I'm sorry.
Writers need those, because otherwise your book would be 5 pages. And that's it. Digression is where the good stuff is. That's where the good stuff is. So I'm really interested all my life long in where reality is. What is reality? Is reality your experience? Is it my experience? Is it somewhere in between us? What is reality? It's a Rashomon thing, right? Each of us will go home and have a different account of what this hour was, and so in the novel, for me, everybody would have a different account of what that signified. But I wanted the reader to experience the life as they experienced it with different characters, because there are these 5 different points of view, before there's any sort of, I don't want to get into that. If you haven't read it, I don't want to talk about this. But what I would say is, an analogy for me is colonialism itself, right? Which is one of the reasons for the secret of the. Like, if you think about colonialism, the generation born at the turn of the 20th century believed it was a good, right? Believed in the glory of French culture, believed in the force of the Catholic religion, believed that these were great and wonderful things that were being brought to people who sadly had not been exposed to them, right? And that was in a time of great cultural certainties, although
Matthew Arnold, Dover Beach, I hear already in my ear, so the certainties were perhaps eroding, but in that time, there was a very different worldview. And then if you were somebody who came of age after the Second World War, as these characters in the middle generation do, you were suddenly exposed to a completely different worldview, which was believing in self-determination for all nations, autonomy, the end of colonialism. The United States is an important driver, with the UN in giving nations independence and autonomy. And so if you grew up in a colonial country, you could no longer, or if it was a very particular choice to come of age in a colonial country and choose to think of that as still a great idea. I mean, not to say people did some, but then by the time you get to the generation that I am, there were very few people who were going to make a case for colonialism. But the facts are, I think the facts remain the same. What people prioritized or didn't changes, and the stories that we have. So I feel like that's part of what for me the novel is trying to do, is trying to reveal the ways in which the same narrative facts have very different effects on different people at different times.
And what I appreciated about this secret in particular is that it kind of, in those last moments of the book, you feel like you're a family member. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had family secrets revealed to me, and exactly what you do is you review the past few decades of your life and review it all through this new lens. And so it kind of felt like we were all part of the same family, which I really enjoyed. And, by all accounts, this is such an epic novel. Like you said, it takes place over multiple generations, spans 40 years, continents, all those things. Do you have a favorite epic novel?
Do I have a favorite epic novel? I'm a great lover of epic novels.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a few. I mean, I love War and Peace. I love Anna Karenina. I love Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. I love Buddenbrooks, by Thomas Mann. I'm sure there are more. Do you like an epic?
I do. I actually have a follow-up question, which is if somebody feels intimidated by reading one of those, if you have any suggestions to go about it. But I actually, last year in 2024, I set this goal for myself to read some chunky novels. And it was a really wonderful experience. East of Eden, what a knockout. And then also, I think Demon Copperhead also, I mean, these are more kind of, a little bit more contemporary than the classics that you're talking about, but they have that same kind of gravitas, I think. But if there's anybody here that thinks, man, I would love to tackle War and Peace, but I'm a little scared.
I can tell you what to do.
Please do. I say the room, but I'm like, it's me.
Yi-Yun Lee,
Yes.
who is a Princeton writer, during the pandemic, with the literary magazine of Public Space, did an online reading group, and then she published a book about the online reading group. But what she did was divide the book for each and every one of us into, I think it's between 20 and 30 minutes a day. So you can read, each day 20 to 30 minutes, and you will get through the book in a couple months. Right? But I mean, I feel like, how fast. Just so you know, I like a book that goes with you through life for a time is a fantastic thing.
Yes.
The terrible thing is feeling you have to finish it in a hurry. I've been reading. It's wonderful. I was telling somebody about it. I've been reading for 2 or 3 months at bedtime, just a few pages at a time, a biography of Svetlana, who lived here also, I believe, daughter of Stalin. Absolutely riveting, unbelievably interesting. I'm not managing. It's just for my pleasure. It's not homework. So I'm only managing a couple pages a day. But I don't forget what happened.
I'll ask one more quick question. I know Jamie is coming up, but I mentioned, that you are just an out-of-this-world teacher of the art of creative writing. What does that give your work, that you get to teach and write, kind of commingling the two?
Would that I were commingling the two. I feel like one of the things that's hard to teach, do you teach at all?
I did before I had kids. And
It's hard to do, yes, yes. So my kids are grown up, so I don't really have an excuse for not managing, but I find it, I love teaching, and I feel I'm constantly learning from my students, and all sorts of different things, and things about myself. And, I don't know if, I'm sure there are some teachers in the room, and they're the students who you know immediately how to help. It's almost, and then there are the people who you have to figure it out, and sometimes you don't figure it out, and you learn a lot from that too, when you don't know what it is that they need from you. It's. I have a friend who's a very good friend who's a physics professor, and we came out of a talk once, and I said, "Did you enjoy that talk?" And she said, "Her words don't fit in my head." And I find that so useful. I feel like it's really, I totally know what she means. It's like some things, so that, like, as a teacher, there are the times when the words just fit in your head, and you're like, let's just chat, we'll get this sorted out. You've got 3 things to do, and you're on your way. And then, right, and then there are the times when the words don't fit so easily, and I feel like then you're learning the whole time. It's really interesting.
And that is exactly what it's like to write a book. It's like some things you're like, check, and other things you're like, Good.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the audience question and answer portion. And Cliff is going to run a microphone out. If you have a question, raise your hand. And while we're getting ready to do that, it's a tradition at the soiree for these 2 questions to be asked. So one question that is always asked is, and this is for both of you, this is both for Amy, Jo, and Claire to answer, if you have any authors that you automatically add to your to-be-read list, your TBR, as soon as it is announced they have a new book coming out, and if so, who are they? And also, just can you share with the audience a book or 2 that you have read recently that you would recommend?
Aren't those related?
They are kind of related, but maybe not.
Would you like to go first?
I can if you'd like. Okay, so auto add to my TBR, auto buy authors for me, I would say Barbara Kingsolver. I love her. And Sue Monk Kidd. I think I've read everything both of those women have read. And, what's amazing is they're both fiction and nonfiction, and their works are always in conversation with each other, which is super fascinating. So those are 2 that I automatically read whenever I hear that they've got a new book coming out. In terms of books I've read this year that I really enjoyed, if you liked James by Percival Everett, I feel everyone has enjoyed that that's read it. His book, The Trees, is about the legacy of lynching in America. And what is so incredible about this book is that it is brutal and eye-opening and honest and funny. I don't know how he does it, but he just brings such a joy to these hard moments without taking away from what that history is. So it is just a fantastic book. I've been reading also, a lot of old favorites of mine. And if you enjoyed Claire's book and you haven't read The History of Love by Nicole Krauss, I think you would enjoy that one too. It's that same idea of, letters, novels, memoirs, things like that, kind of getting lost and found over the course of generations. And I'm going to throw this one in here because it's summer and we all like a good beach read. If you are into fantasy or would like to try something, I just finished Shield of Sparrows by Devney Perry, and it was fantastic. I just gulped it up in about a day and a half. So those are my suggestions for you.
I don't. So many, so few. How do you choose just a couple?
It's hard.
It's hard. It's hard. I always want to read new books by Katie Kitamura. And Yiyun Lee. I always want to read a new book by Yiyun Lee. And I just read. There are many other people whose books I always want to read, but I don't know whether to go on about them now. Like I'm telling you, read Rosemary Sullivan's Svetlana. And books that I've recently read. I am a great admirer of a writer named Fiona McFarlane, who's an Australian writer who teaches at Berkeley, and who I had a time, I have trouble keeping up, and then I had a couple years when I was writing book reviews for Harper's, like a roundup every month, and that was great because I read a lot of stuff, including, I'm speaking of other Princeton people, Peter Brown's autobiography. Peter Brown, the biographer of Augustine, among many other books. That's 700 pages though. But Fiona McFarlane, whose most recent book is called Highway 13, and it's connected short stories around a sort of serial killer case, but there are no serial killings in the book. And no, don't worry, it's not scary. I mean, it's unsettling, but it's not, but she's amazing. And what other, I feel as though, I have some Hunter authors. Did you overlap with Fatin Abbas? No, Fatin Abbas is a fiction writer whose first novel, Ghost Season, came out a couple years ago. It's very beautiful. She's Sudanese, and it's set in Sudan. And Munjin is also a Hunter writer. And Brad Fox, on the nonfiction front, Brad Fox wrote a book called The Bathysphere that came out 18 months ago maybe, and it won some awards. Do people know what the bathysphere is? Any readers of Tintin? Yet, do you remember Red Rackham's Treasure, when Professor Calculus gets in that weird round solo submarine and goes under? So that was the bathysphere. It was the first deep sea vessel in the late 1920s and 30s, and it was the first time humans went to the very deep ocean, and of course it was before you could take a camera. So there was a guy with a tube who was speaking to a sketch artist up in the boat, saying, "I'm seeing a fish with really weird, frondy fins. The fish is purple and red, or whatever." And the sketch artist was drawing. This is. I would just say, I know, we've got to love sci-fi, fantasy. I'm just not there. I'm like, the world is so amazing, right? Like, it's just so amazing that it's less than a century ago. Some people built the Professor Calculus thing and just were like, let's pop on down to the bottom of the ocean and talk through a tube. To a guy who's going to draw pictures. It's bananas.
Okay, do we have a question out from the audience? Anybody want to? Okay, Cliff is coming around. Just keep your hands up.
Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. But one of the things I'm sitting here concerned about is I'm lamenting the fact that many young people are not being taught how to write cursive. Therefore, they cannot read cursive. And if you think about how many familial letters are someone writing to you, wouldn't it be a terrible loss if these young people, number one, can't write that way, and number two, can't read the kinds of things you're talking about? So rather than a question, I just have a lament. I'm just very touched by your comments about the positivity of reading letters.
If I may offer a word of encouragement, I have a 7-year-old daughter who has not learned cursive in school, but there was something about it that she thought was so beautiful that she started a cursive club, and she is the only member, except for my nieces that are 19 and 20, they joined with her, and she has a little how-to cursive book and things like that. So there's at least one that's going to carry the flames.
It also makes me think, I was listening to a talk by one of the people, he's a Scottish guy who lives in France, who was one of the editors of Beckett's letters, of Samuel Beckett's letters. And I guess Samuel Beckett's letters, had famously bad handwriting. And so, even though there were like, I don't know, 3 or 5 people editing, and they were like but they would all puzzle over, they'd be like, is that an A or an E? So I feel that even when people were taught cursive, they weren't necessarily the best, always the best, but people puzzle over it.
Okay, yes. Yeah.
It was very obvious that your mind is very quick and it is very active as you were talking. And I was curious if you could share a little bit about how you go about your craft, how you go about the task of writing, what your habits are and what your practices are.
Well, thank you. That sounded like a compliment. Thank you. Also, my mind is often quite sluggish and forgetful, but I'm glad that Katie managed to create an illusion of speed. So much is about illusion in life. How I go about my habits. I write by hand. I write fiction by hand. I feel as though, as I say to the students, everything is a balance of freedom and constraint. Everything. It's all a balance of freedom and constraint. And so with the creative work, there has to be some constraint. I have to have some outline, something. But I also, people say, oh, do you know what you're going to write? And no, there has to be discovery. It has to be exciting and surprising. And then there are those moments when you have a sort of eureka, you do. I had the great good fortune to be a writer in residence at the Zuckerman Institute, which is a mind, brain, and behavior institute at Columbia, and to speak to a number of scientists, neuroscientists, who are working, so they work everything from theoretical neuroscientists who are doing mathematical models to people who are psychologists working on human subjects, but everything in between. Needless to say, with the mathematical model scientists, I was really, it was not the nitty-gritty. I could not understand the nitty-gritty. But we talked about sharing these sort of eureka moments where you realize that is it. I realize it's fiction, but when you realize that is exactly what these two people would say or do in this moment, and it's like feeling something click. You're like, yes, exactly. And in a hypothetical mathematical model, which is also coming from somebody's imagination, having the moment where the equation, you're like, that's it. Even though you're writing things you can't actually know, right? So that there is the thrill of the discovery, and that isn't always how it feels. Because a lot of it's like, I don't know, I throw it out, maybe not yet, I know. I'll hold on to it for a while, and we'll see. But I write by hand because very early, my mother said, do not learn to type, because people will want you to be a secretary. But I did learn to type. I learned to type, and I taught myself, and I learned to type, and I was a Kelly girl. I was a Kelly. Remember that? Yes. Remember that? So every summer I would go and I would be a secretary in a law firm or whatever, and they'd always say, why do you want to go back to college? This is a great job. Stick with this. I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. But I type really fast, and so I type faster than I think. And then when you had a computer, it's like, and it looks good, and it looks so good, but it's terrible. The typeface looks so good. So I was like, you write by hand. It's just.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Well, so I love this idea of the eureka moment, and I think every human who has thought or created anything has had that moment in some way or another. But within the eureka moment and giving yourself the ability to travel the labyrinth and create a humongous piece like a novel, how are you able to put yourself into the dream state that receives information?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think, luckily for me, I'm not like François. It's not the bottle of Absolute. Somebody said to me, oh, how do you, I was like, oh, that's chocolate for me. The bar is still in the drawer. The bar is still in the drawer. Just one little piece more. It's a really interesting question, and I don't have one of the things that always makes me feel like I'm a little bit of a fraud when I'm teaching is that I'm actually a great believer in mystery and intuition. And I feel that a lot of stuff you can't tell, and people will find it or they won't find it. But I do know, that, and this is again a sort of a lament about our age a little bit. I do know that boredom is essential. I know that we have to be bored to be creative, actually, and that we can't just, oh, I have an hour, I have allotted an hour for my writing, I will sit down and I will start writing. It doesn't work like that. And it's the thing I worry about with young people whose time is very structured and who don't have, who don't lie in a field and stare at the sky. Because for me, when I've just left my full-time teaching job. And people say, you're retiring. I'm not retiring, I quit my job because I want to do the other job. I'm not retiring. But it's because I realize that I need large chunks of time. And it's hard for me to get them, with full-time teaching. So.
Thank you. I also worry just with the attention span as everybody is getting shorter and shorter, and how that, how we're fed everything in chunks, especially this younger generation. Thank you both for that fabulous conversation. We're so thrilled that you were willing to travel down here to Princeton, and including, visiting with Diana while you're here, but to be at our soiree. And Amy Jo, of course, it's always a pleasure when you moderate an event for us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in March. So right now, we're going to do the drawings for the raffle prizes that everybody did on the book baskets. So before we do that, though, brand new and hot off the presses. So this is to remember your visit here. A Princeton line, that's our